Facebook Live. I see the ad.
We are live, GBC. Good evening.
Okay.
Okay, here we
Hey, good evening,
go.
Grace Bible and community.
Yes.
Those of you that are tuning in, do us a favor as you get connected to this conversation tonight. Leave us a comment. Let us know you're here. Click the magic button in the bottom right hand corner of your screen that says share. That helps us out big time, and we appreciate that. And we're glad to have you. How you doing, Cam?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Last weekend was rough, man. I had a lot to say. So much so that I had to carry over the conversation to Wednesday night. So I'm interested to see how many folks get on tonight because I tied their devotion to the Lord to them getting on tonight. So no, maybe I didn't
That's
do
right.
that. No, I didn't do that. But hey, I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well. I'm getting over a sinus infection that has absolutely nothing to do with COVID, which I'm grateful for. Not grateful for a COVID sinus infection, of course. But you were gone last week, man. Where were you? Up in the mountains, dude?
Yeah, spent a little time in the mountains. Ansley and I try to get up there every October just to enjoy watching the leaves change. We ride around the motorcycle a little bit, and man, I'll tell you what I love. So we go northwestern North Carolina, Banner Elk area. Am I
You are
am I
frozen
coming through
up.
smooth?
No,
I'm
you're
freezing
not.
up.
A little bit. A little bit.
It definitely looks real choppy on my end.
Interesting. That's a first. Of
Huh.
course, we didn't have any issues earlier, but you know how the demons in
Yeah. Let me
technology.
sign out.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me sign out, sign back in. I'll be right back,
Yep.
folks.
Call me back in. Well, hey, as Dustin gets back on, we're glad you guys are here. We're thankful that you're here. We're going to be continuing the conversation tonight from this past weekend. Dustin was going to kind of share a little bit of where we're heading over the next couple of weeks, which is going to be really engaging since this whole gospel and politics conversation is going to be wrapped around really what we've been saying for the last 2 weeks, these really divisive topics that are driving a lot of the public discourse, a lot of the conversation and chatter that's going on, even on your social media screens. And so we are glad you are here. If you weren't here this past weekend, we're preaching on kind of the idea of politics and the story of God, and how our politics cannot function as the story of God over our lives, but it must fit into the story of God over our lives. And so you're on the wrong side, dude. That's just not going to work for me, man.
Am I am I coming in kind of smooth at
Yeah,
least?
a little bit, a
All
little
right.
bit, a little
Okay.
bit.
Okay. I tell you, I don't know what's up. My internet's humming on my end. So,
Well, hey, I was just telling
uh,
them, thank you. I'm glad you're back. I was just telling them, big idea number one from this past weekend was
right.
we can't allow our politics to function as the story of God over our lives, but it needs to fit into the story of God. But there was another big idea, man. Tell me what that was since you were glued to your TV screen this weekend, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the other big idea that we'll be discussing tonight is that every political ideology offers us a promise of deliverance, but will ultimately fail to deliver on the goods.
Yeah.
It will. And matter of fact, God designed it to be that way, my friends, because God designed it so that lesser gods would never fail to fail us.
Hey, you know
Um,
what? I got that
huh?
line from the gentleman we are inviting onto our live stream tonight, who got it from
Well, that's
another guy who
embarrassing.
wrote a
That's
book.
his line.
No, he got it from somebody else, so it's
Okay, I was
okay.
gonna say, Chris, man, I know you're listening to this. Didn't know I was ripping your stuff. I say it in my sermons all the time.
Christopher Wright, I think, and he'll tell us the book that it came from, I think,
That's
if
right.
I remember
Yeah.
correctly. Well, hey, man,
Hey,
introduce
well,
this guy who's coming to help us. Well, I told them that you're going to be taking us for the next couple of weeks, man. To we're talking.
you already did that.
Oh, I didn't go into details because I want you to have to say the hard
Well,
thing, man.
no, no, but look, yeah, let me give a little intro and then get out of the way. We have a really special guest with us that his gospel fluency is far more developed than ours, and you're going to get an opportunity to just get to hear from him. And we're thankful for him joining us. Before I introduce him, let me just catch everybody up. If you are watching online right now, do us a favor. Even if you're watching this after the fact, do us a favor. Click the like button, leave us a comment to let us know you were here. As always, this is an interactive type discussion for those of you watching live. We have team members that are just kind of monitoring the comments section, and we'll try to correspond as quickly as we can with you, but we're about 10 seconds ahead, just so you know. But do us a favor, everyone that's watching. We ask all of you would take the time right now to click in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen the share button.
Yeah.
We are in a discussion in our weekends called The Gospel in Politics. I remember when I first announced that we were going in that direction, our church family you heard like the in the crowd, like the anticipation. So yeah, the gospel and politics, and truly like the gospel being the coloring word to the whole thing. We want to be a people who aren't viewing the gospel through the lens of the world that we live in, but we're viewing the world that we live in through the lens of the gospel. And so that's what we're working through. Pastor Randy gave us a 50,000-foot kingdom view of global politics a couple of weeks ago. Pastor Cameron this past week brought us into the conversation of how politics fits into the story of God. And this coming Sunday, we're going to talk about the gospel in the pandemic. The week after that, the gospel in race. And landing on November 1st, conveniently a couple of days before the election, we'll talk about the gospel and the election. Now, this past weekend, Pastor Cam presented two big ideas that we were just rapping back and forth about. Just in case you missed it, let me give it to you one more time. Big idea number one that he discussed this weekend in the sermon is relating to politics and the story of God. Here's big idea number one. If we're not careful, our politics will function as the story of God over our lives instead of fitting into the story of God. That was big idea number one. Now, if you missed that discussion, you can catch it on our YouTube channel right here on Facebook. You can just scroll down after this is over tonight, watch that sermon. You can catch it on our website, www.gbc.life, or when you're driving to work in the morning, you can listen on the podcast, which you can find at Grace Bible Sebring. You can listen to the audio version on the podcast. Now, tonight, for those of you just signing on, the second big idea of how politics fit into the story of God. Here's the second big idea that we're going to discuss tonight is every political ideology offers us a promise of deliverance, but will ultimately fail to deliver on the goods. So without any further ado, we have a very special guest that's joining us tonight for this conversation, a man that Cameron and I both admire as a Bible teacher, as a pastor, and a leader. This is Pastor Chris Gonzalez. He should be popping up on the screen here any second now. Chris is
welcome,
joining
man.
us. Yeah, Chris.
Good to be with you guys.
Chris is joining us all the way from Arizona. In this great time to be alive. We are preaching a sermon halfway across the country with each other tonight. Pastor Chris Gonzalez serves as pastor at Missio Dei Church in Phoenix, Arizona. And he's also the professor, a professor. And I guess are you lead professor? Or you're the,
Hey.
Are you like the dean or the chancellor over the school?
Executive director. I saw that on the website.
Okay.
I do stuff. I get stuff done.
He does a lot of teaching and a lot of leading and a lot of shepherding at the Missional Training Center. That is, I think it's based in Arizona, right? It's a sending organization. You really have, you guys are serving throughout the globe, and training and equipping pastors and missionaries and leaders and Grace Bible family and those of you tuning in. It is a privilege to be able to have Chris join us for this conversation. So let me turn it over to he and Pastor Cam to really kind of guide us through the rest of this conversation. And I'm going to just sit in the background and listen in as well.
I'm gonna take your face off. I mean, I know you're pretty to look at, but like you're taking up some of the space. So I'll bring you back if you got something to say, Chris. I want to give you some more room on the page, man. Hey, so politics and the story of God. Gosh, a lot of that came from some information I heard from you guys when I met you in Memphis for kind of a Saturate training session, and specifically. You were doing some teaching through Saturate, just some friends of ours that are helping to equip churches to live on mission and in community together. And so, man, I really just want to kind of give you the lay of the land, let you kind of lead out with this conversation. Our folks, we're going to invite you, please. We want your thoughts, your questions, your opinions, your rebukes, your critiques. Like, get into the keyboards and bring your comments because we want this to be a dialogue with you instead of a sermon at you. And so, man, Chris, give us a little bit of some background as you kind of approach this conversation about how the gospel and politics go hand in hand, man.
Yeah, sounds good. It's good to be with you guys. I really appreciate it. It's 5:10. Is it 8:10 your time or 7:10?
8:10
You
our
guys East
time, and
Coast?
you got to bounce
8:10.
at
Yep.
what time?
I got to bounce. I had another meeting. I'm talking a bunch of Southern evangelicals right now at 8 o'clock Eastern, and then at the top of the hour, I'm talking to a bunch of interfaith liberal, all Trump hating people on another Zoom call. So all that to say, I have 50 minutes, and I feel like I'm about to get whiplash. But what I love is I don't see any of the comments. You guys get all the comments, so I'm just gonna let it fly, and you guys can and you guys can critique and you guys can handle all the stuff that comes out of it. But I figure I just try to throw some stuff out here. So it's good to be with you guys. I'll share my screen here in a second, but yeah, I grew up in Memphis, went to junior high and high school there, and I guess like my first thinking of politics, I didn't grow up as a Christian, but my first like foray into politics, I just remember I cared about it a lot early on. I remember being in middle school, mowing the lawn in the summer and listening on this was before iPods obviously and all that, but I just had an AM radio with headphones. And I remember listening to Rush Limbaugh as I would mow the lawn. And I would mow the lawn in the middle of the heat of the day in the summer because I wanted to be able to listen to Rush at the same time. And so I cared deeply about this stuff. And then when I became a Christian in college, it didn't go away. But it was confusing, conflicting. It felt like, okay, so I used to care about politics, which was stuff down here, but now I care about like real stuff up here that really matters. And so for the last, basically for the last 23 years since I've been a Christian, I've been trying to figure out, like, how do politics and religion, my faith, Jesus, and the presidency, how do all these things work together? And so what I want to share, let me share my screen. Cam, hopefully this will work.
Working on it. All right, you are sharing. So once you go live, we're
Beautiful.
good.
We good? So you can see my screen?
Yep. And I'm going to go ahead and
All
put
right.
it.
So
There you go.
I'm just going to walk through some slides with you guys and do maybe about 20 minutes of teaching. You guys feel free to just like throw those questions, yell at me, whatever, ask follow-up questions, clarifying. And then for you guys too, if people are asking questions or you guys want to push back or ask questions in the middle of this, like, you're not going to offend me. So I can go straight through or we can talk.
Cool.
So this slide right here is some minted Brussels sprout ice cream. And you would think Brussels sprout, this is like how I think most people think, is like Brussels sprouts and ice cream are two things that do not go together. They ought not be together. And what I found, this is shameful, but in Britain, in England, this is a Christmas delicacy that people actually eat. But it shouldn't be. It's not right. And everybody would admit that. And so it feels like that's what politics and religion are. So like, why would you talk about politics? You don't mix those two things. Those are the two things you don't talk about in good company. And so the reason that is, I just want to break this down for you guys. So this is how we normally think about religion and politics, or that, not just that, this is how we think about the world. Like, this is how we think about reality. We're trained to think this way from our culture. It's deep within us that there's an upstairs. And then notice that line. I made that line like thicker as I was making the slide. It normally would just be like a 2-point font. I think I made it like a 15-point font because it's a hard line that you do not break. So there's upstairs and then there's downstairs. And upstairs are things like heaven and values and church, Christianity, religion. And then downstairs are things like the world, facts, politics. So heaven is upstairs. That's spiritual stuff. The world is downstairs. Values, like, what are things we value? What are things you value as a church, as a human being? These are our values. But then values are subjective. Facts are objective. They're downstairs of the world. They're like here and now. And the same way, church and religion, we're talking upstairs. So go to church on Sunday, go to Grace Bible and talk about church and spirituality and Jesus. But then downstairs is politics. That's what you're going to do on the first Tuesday of November, is we're going to vote in politics, and that's downstairs stuff. So this is how I'm just going to go on a limb. I'll just say it. This is how you view reality. Like, this is your default mode of viewing reality. Now, watch what happens. I want to give you a couple verses and show you how you read. These are verses from the Bible. And if this is your view of reality, which it is for us, how we view them. So a couple verses. One from John 18, Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. So what's Jesus saying in that? He's saying, my kingdom is about upstairs stuff. It's about heaven and values and kingdom values and the church and what we're doing here. It's not of the world. It's not about politics. It's not those things. So if we care about God's kingdom, we should be caring about the upstairs stuff, not about politics, and we need not concern ourselves there. Or another one, Philippians 3:20, our citizenship is in heaven. So basically saying we're citizens of heaven upstairs, not downstairs. Here's the problem with this. The problem with this kind of way of thinking about it is that we get this from a guy named Plato. So he's a Greek philosopher. You probably heard of him, Plato. The problem is this isn't the way that people like Moses and Jeremiah and Isaiah and Jesus and Paul and Peter and John. So the people who are writing the Bible, the people who are living out God's story, God's mission in the midst of the Bible, and even Jesus, the Lord himself, this upstairs, downstairs, this is a Greek philosophical way of looking at the world. And it's not how Jesus and all these other people would have seen the world. So what I want to do on this next slide is this was their expectation. This is the way that Jesus and all these other guys would have seen the Bible. And what I want to plead with you is that we need to start really trying to, how do we reframe and not see the world through Plato's eyes, but see the world through Jesus's eyes? And so when Jesus came on the scene, this is what every first century Jewish person looking for and seeing and expecting. See this as a timeline. So it's going forward. And you have the old system, the old age, and the age to come, or God's kingdom. And so they would have thought we're back here in the world system, in the old age, and things are broken. This is the age of sin and evil and brokenness and death. And so this is the world because of the fall. And they would have realized for us as Israel, we've been exiled and we're not living in God's blessing because of our own sin. But what they were hoping for, see the arrow coming down? The hope that the prophets had given them, think Isaiah, think Jeremiah, think all these new covenant expectations and the coming of the Messiah. They were saying there's going to be a world God's going to do something. He's going to send a Messiah who's going to be like a conquering king, a general who's going to come in and he's going to wipe out all these evil oppressing people and he's going to rescue us, God's faithful people, and that's when he's going to establish God's kingdom. So they were expecting a Messiah or a king or a general to come, and that was when he was going to bring resurrection to God's creation. He was going to resurrect, going to restore, going to fix, going to get rid of all the brokenness, send it all away, and he was going to bring God's kingdom. And God's kingdom this is huge, is the restoration of God's good creation. God doesn't junk what he made, he fixes it. And so God had made a good creation. It had been broken because of sin, but the Messiah was going to come and fix it all. But that's not what happened. So that's the worldview. That's the expectation. But something crazy happens in Jesus. And you can see Paul in his letters is trying to make sense of this and trying to explain to people, guys, here's what actually happened. Is that these two ages that were supposed to butt up against each other, the old age and the new age, the world system and Jesus's kingdom, they're supposed to butt up against each other. Messiah was supposed to come. They've actually overlapped. And so what we have now is what we call the already and the not yet, the overlapping of the ages. And so Jesus has come. Remember when he comes at the beginning of, say, like Mark 1:15, I think, he says, the kingdom of God is at hand. It's here. The kingdom is here. And then he goes and he lives and he shows, he demonstrates the kingdom. He dies on the cross. He rises again, his resurrection, that up arrow going there. Jesus rises. And that initiates and begins the beginning of God's kingdom. And we now live here in the overlapping of this age. So there's us, we're the church. Those are all us people. And we're living here in the overlapping of these two ages until one day when Jesus is going to come back again, there's going to be the end of the old age finally, and we'll live in God's kingdom forever. So now we look at those same two verses. Remember where it said, my kingdom is not of this world? He's not talking about upstairs, downstairs. He's talking about there's this overlap in the ages. And so look at those little emoji people there. They're sitting there, and Jesus is saying, you guys are living in the midst of this. I'm about to die and rise again. This is John 18. He's about to be crucified. This is his trial. And he's saying, my kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is not of the old system, the world system. My kingdom is about a new kingdom that's coming. And now we as his followers get, by the power of the Spirit, to live in the midst of that. Or our citizenship is in heaven. As we live in the midst of this overlapping, already not yet, the groaning and the blessing, all this is the tension that we live in. But we know our citizenship is not looking back to the left to the old system. Our citizenship, because of the cross and resurrection and the promise of Jesus' return, is to live by the power of the Spirit in the kingdom, in God's kingdom. So let me just pause right there. Cam, any questions or clarification? I just kind of went off for a little bit, and if not, I can just keep going on to the next thing.
No, man, I appreciate that. Dustin and I just got done, before we kind of began this gospel and politics conversation, camping out for the last 3 months in Colossians chapter 3, talking about living as risen people in a fallen world. Like, we are above the line people called to live out the kingdom of God below the line in a seen and temporal world. 2 Corinthians 4:18, Colossians 3, and really, we need to know how to put shoe leather on this, though, specifically as you're about to take us, man, and talking about like a divisive political season when like people are forgetting that we are kingdom citizens, man. So yeah, Dustin, thoughts?
Okay, I had to unmute myself. Sorry. But I did want to add, just for the folks that are just getting involved in the conversation right now, that we are about ankle deep in the discussion of politics and the story of God. I just want to keep that in front of us. We're talking about politics and the story of God. And we're kind of addressing this big idea that every political ideology offers us a promise of deliverance, but will ultimately fail to deliver on the goods. And so I just wanted to keep that lens on everybody as we continue to move forward in the conversation.
That's good, Dustin. I think in this, you can see this, that in this picture, the only thing that's going to bring about Jesus's kingdom is Jesus. And so if we start looking to some political system or political politician or we see already, even in this, that's not the thing that's going to end the world system, end the old age, and bring us into the new age.
But Chris, every political ideology offers us a savior, a promise of deliverance, a narrative story, right?
Yep, it does. They do. Well, let's talk about, you want me to move on to that?
Yeah, take it, man.
Beautiful. All right, so here's this little political religions matrix that we put together. And me and my friend Jim Mullins,
by the way,
he's a pastor at
this really
Redemption
spoke to
Church.
Me, dude. When I first saw you teach on this, I was like, it seared into me. I've like shared this with people, So I'm glad that we're getting to share it with these folks tonight.
We put this together about a year ago, and we put it together like summer of 2019, basically saying, look, in 2016, we failed as church leaders in being prepared for the election and being prepared for all that happened and kind of what happened in our culture. And we did not lead our people well, and our people didn't live as God's united holy people, living as a witness in our city very well. And so Jim and myself and others and kind of our Surge network here, we kind of put this together and started teaching it about a year ago, saying, hey, we want to prepare the church to enter into this next election season. We thought the big thing of 2020 was going to be the election. We didn't realize COVID and race and all this other stuff, but still here we are. And so what this is trying to make sense of, it's kind of divided. It's not just divided, but everything is kind of confusing and doesn't really make sense. And so what this is an attempt to explain a little better the landscape of where we are. And what I've found is if you get what I'm about to share with you, it kind of like it gives you a lens by which you start understanding the news a little bit better and what people are saying and why they're saying stuff. And you can kind of understand yourself a little bit better. And this is the biggest thing. You can stay away from idolatry and unwittingly and unintentionally falling into false worship of a false religion. So we'll get more into that in a second. But left, right, this is pretty obvious. So on the right, you have more conservative Republican Party. On the left, you have Democrats. And essentially, the way we often think about this is like, plot yourself on this line. And most of us would like, I'm in the center, I'm center right, I'm center left, or I'm far on the right, I'm far on the left. And you're always like positioning yourself against somebody else. So this is where this started to break down. I realized, I was thinking back in 2016, we had this guy in our church who was feeling the burn. So, but like, he was all about Bernie Sanders, all about revolution, all about Bernie Sanders. So you'd think if you're thinking about Democratic primaries in 2016, he's all the way on the left, right? He's all the way on the left, as far as you can go there. Well, Bernie ends up not getting the nomination, bows out of the race. Hillary gets the nod. And this guy gets full on the Trump train, like wearing MAGA hats. He's all about Trump. And Trump, you think, is all the way on the right. So we started looking, it's like, how do you, and this guy's not insane. We're just sitting there like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? How does this make sense? And it made total sense to him that given the options, those are the options that he wanted to go to and figure out. And, but this is the other thing, not just that specific example, just in general, it doesn't make sense of our culture. There's something else happening in our culture. And so what we did was made it into a little matrix. And so the x-axis, the M and the P stand for modern and postmodern. This is the big philosophical thing. I'm going to try to boil this down and make this really clear. These are big, dumb words. Modern is basically saying my worldview, the way I look at the world, the way we look at the world, is that the world is all, we're all in the same story and we're all going somewhere. And us humans are going to bring about through technology, through invention, through education, through making the world better. We're going to become better people, better humans. Everything's going to get better. We're going to create better systems, institutions, and we're going to achieve paradise. Like we'll get there. And so that's the modern story that has gripped our Western culture for the last 400, 500, 600 years. And so that's modernism. But then postmodernism, the P down at the bottom, is this growing sense kind of from within as modernism, all false gods never fail to fail. That's Chris Wright. So I stole that from him. You can steal from me, but we all steal from Chris Wright. And all false gods never fail to fail. The story of modernism starts breaking down. And people are like, hey, your modern story that we're all going to move forward is just like, it's not actually true. And it's just a way of oppressing different people. It's just a way, like you're saying, hey, we're all in this together. That's just a way for you guys to get ahead on us. And so you have modern and postmodern. So if you use this, there's these 4 different quadrants. And hopefully I haven't lost you. I didn't explain modern and postmodern very well, but let me see if this makes sense. So here's 4 quadrants. And what I'm doing is I'm putting one word that kind of explains the value that they have, what they want, and then I'm going to give you a politician to make this a little more concrete and tick some of you guys off. So,
well, hey, let me jump in before you go there, Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, we understand that this probably does not encapsulate every possible nuance that could ever be explained or taken to the nth degree. And so, again, this is just a resource and a tool to help us think. And if nothing else, trust Dustin and I as you get to know Chris, because this has been a really helpful tool and resource for us, again, in how we're thinking about such polarization and division that's happening in our country. So please take it away, brother.
Thanks, man.
I do think you'll find this helpful, guys. But remember that this is interactive discussion. Even though we're having Chris just run with it to get through his material, and then we'll take questions later. But we do have a team of folks that are watching the comment section that are jotting down any major questions that you may have. So please post those, and we'll try to circle back around to them before Chris jumps off, but especially before Cam and I jump off.
Sounds good. So in this top right is responsibility is the big word. And this is kind of typical historic conservatism. This is the classic Republican Party. This is what I grew up with when I was listening to Rush Limbaugh as a conservative, as a registered Republican. This is basically saying, hey, if everybody would take responsibility, like responsibility is a good thing. You see it in the garden that Adam and Eve were given responsibility to care for, to cultivate God's creation, the garden, to be fruitful, to multiply. There's responsibility. It's a good thing. And the idea is, if people would take responsibility, if individuals would take their responsibility, if families would be responsible, if governments and nations would be responsible, then we'd be in a good place. And so a classic, the Bushes, so both Bushes would be or Reagan would probably be the classic example of the top right when we're thinking about that. So the next, going over counterclockwise to the top left, would be this is the classic traditional Democratic Party kind of, and so you could think of the Clintons, maybe Bill Clinton especially, and the word here is progress. If we can educate people and reform our institutions and build up our institutions and our governments, and we will progress towards a better future for everybody. And so the goal can be a little bit bigger government. The goal can be getting more education. If we can get everybody to get college, get everybody educated, get everybody to be that, then we'll be able to become more progressive and progress forwards to a new vision for where humans are. And everybody will get pulled out of poverty. Racism will end, all these different things. And so progress, that we're progressing forward, and we need to keep progressing towards something. Now, going down to the bottom left, so this is more postmodern, and realize with those top two, we're all in this together type thing with responsibility and progress. With the postmodern left, the word is equality. Hey, as you guys have been saying, take responsibility, let's make progress. The elite have been progressing, and you can say take responsibility, but we weren't all born with a silver spoon in our mouth. We weren't all born on third base. I was born with 2 outs and 2 strikes and all that. And so, hey, there's not equality among us all. And so the big thing that maybe a Bernie Sanders or the squad, AOC would be modern people here, is with kind of the progressive, more postmodern, progressive liberal agenda would be more around, we want equality for everyone. And that one. And then over on the bottom right, the postmodern right would be the word security. And so, hey, this is a dangerous world. The modern agenda has broken down. And so we need to take care of ours. We need to find security. And so how do we find security in the world? And Trump would be a great example, obviously, of this. So you can think of the foreign policy for Trump would be America first. And so, hey, we need to secure our borders. We need to pull out of other places, and we need to worry about ourselves and our own security. And once we do that, then maybe the other people, we can help the other people as well. But security would be the big word there. Now, I want to be really clear on this. I did this with responsibility, but progress, equality, and security are all good things. They're all good parts of God's creation that we see in the garden. And so people and all let's take all 4 of these politicians, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Donald Trump. And when they're saying these things and they're appealing to these things, when George W. Bush appeals to taking personal responsibility, when Bill Clinton says, if we can, if we can make our institutions and our government sound and better, we'll educate people, that'll get us somewhere. When Bernie Sanders and AOC talk about we want everybody to have equality and to be on equal footing, and when Donald Trump and others say, hey, we need to be secure and take care of ourselves and be able to live in God's world, all of those, you see all those in the garden. And so in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all that, but all these are good parts of God's creation. Here's the problem, and I'm running through this fast, but the problem is this, that in all these, what we want to do, the propensity is to go, instead of in towards the center and see these as good aspects of God's creation, is to make them into idols. So we can make each one of these things, it's one good aspect of God's creation, but we make it the only thing. And so what we tend to do is all of us, we tend to go out to the outer extremes of that quadrant, and we tend to get pulled that way. And so I might even say, so I'd say this to you, if you had, this is a good exercise, but where would you put yourself in this? As you look at this matrix, where do you put yourself? And let's just assume you're not in the perfect center. You know, that's the right answer. We want to be in the center. But where do you find yourself? So for me, I mean, I told you my background. I'm a registered Republican still. I would put myself in the top right. So that's where I grew up, and I grew up in a rich white suburb in Germantown, Tennessee. My parents were well off. I'm educated. I have a master's degree. I'm in a doctoral program. I've grown up kind of in this, I'm an evangelical pastor. There's also not just because of all that, but that's the voices I've heard. That's who I am. And I find myself thinking, I default towards that of saying, man, if people would just take responsibility and be responsible, then we would get along. And that's what government should provide, that, and should incentivize that responsibility. I wonder for yourself, where you see yourself as you look at your story, and even as you look at yourself right now, is there one of these four quadrants that you'd put yourself in, or maybe right on the line of one or two? And that can help you kind of see where you're at. Once you do that, so I'll end with this, and then we'll do some Q&A. Is I showed you these, but the propensity and the danger is to get pulled out into the different thing, and we end up facing, which direction do you face? So if I'm in responsibility in top right, my tendency will be to face out further into the top right. So the voices that Facebook, the voices that Twitter are going to incentivize me, the kind of that I'm going to hear, and that I'm going to want to hear, and that are like me and sound like me, are going to be more out that way in the top right. And it's going to pull me that way. And my propensity is to go that way into idolatry, and to think, if only that thing would happen, then we'll all be fine. So, and it happens with each of these.
Hey, Chris,
so go ahead.
Why idolatry? Unpack that idea just briefly, if you can. We talk a lot about it. An idol isn't necessarily a small figurine shrine that's on the altar in our home, but an idol can be any good thing, right? That becomes just an ultimate thing or something like that, right?
Yeah. I think we do it. I mean, it's a good, like, God's created his world to be, it's multifaceted, it's rich, and it's profound. And so it's like in the garden, you have all these things. There's like in God's good creation, we are supposed to be responsible for ourselves and for each other and for caring for the creation progress. It's not just supposed to be, we're just sitting there doing nothing. They're not just hanging out with God, looking at their belly buttons, enjoying, like, there was a job to do, and it's supposed to progress from just a little garden to the city, and to caring for, making the whole creation into reflecting God's glory. Men and women were created equal. All the people were supposed to be equal in equality, and they were secure. They had they could eat from the tree of life, and there was safety. There was no death. And so you have all those things are good things. But what ends up happening with idolatry is we focus and we glorify and make an idol, make an ultimate out of a good thing of God's creation, and instead of giving thanks for it and saying, I'm so thankful that God created a world that are all these things. Now, because of brokenness, we make an idol out of one of these things. And when we do that, we and you can see it if you're seeing yourself. For me, seeing myself in the top right, I put myself up there and I start looking that way up to the responsibility. And it's like, and I just say, if everyone would just take their responsibility, if everyone would just be responsible, and that's true. That's a good part of God's creation. It's true, but I'm making it an idol, and that's the only thing I can see. That's the only lens that I view through, and I don't start seeing these other lenses as well, and these other parts, and I start ripping apart God's creation, the fabric of God's creation, because I'm just pulling on one thread all the time.
That's good. No, I appreciate that, man.
So this is where, I mean, this is where it's really as a pastor, it gets like really personal for me and kind of like eye-opening. So if you like, one way to know you got an idol, you put the word the phrase, the ism on the end of something. So like progressivism is an idol, or Judaism or Hinduism. If you put ism on the end of something, it's a religion, or it's an idolatrous thing. Well, what happens is, I think you could make these things into different, like, isms: responsibilityism, progressivism, equalityism, securityism, where it becomes the ultimate thing that we're ultimately after. Well, this is what, if I said to you guys, hey, Cameron, Dustin, you got, just so you know, you have people in your congregation, like vast amounts of people in Grace Bible Church that are defecting. They're converting. If I said you have like a quarter of your congregation is converting to Islam. They're becoming Muslim. A quarter are in danger of becoming Mormon. A quarter are going to Judaism, going back to the law. You'd be like freaking out and get like having conversations. You'd be, hey, we got to figure this out. We don't want people to convert to another religion. Well,
Teaching apologetics and
you'd be teaching apologetics like that. You'd be having these things every day of the week, right? Like trying to figure out, we're going to teach all this stuff. We're going to meet with you. Well, here's the danger that you see happening, and it gets highlighted in this election season, is that I wonder if there's people in your church that are, without even knowing it, and still calling themselves Christians, still showing up on Sunday, but actually what they're worshiping is one of these religions. Like they're actually, rather than being focused on Jesus and him as the king and the kingdom that they're hoping in, they're being drawn away into these other religions. So that's the danger. The invitation, and this is the kind of the put in the nuts and bolts to it, and kind of where do we go from here. The circle that I put up here, this purple circle, purple is a color of royalty, and so see that as Jesus and the king. This is a table. So here's the reality. There is a table at the center of this, that is the table of King Jesus. It's the table of the kingdom, and Jesus is at the center of the table. So that's the key thing. I put the cross there. Jesus is at the center of the table. He holds all these things together perfectly. Now, those four circles, this is the place, this is what requires humility to really pursue the holiness and unity that's required to be God's people in this world, and especially at this time. The reality is that we're not where Jesus is. So like, we're not at the center of the table. Let's just let Jesus be there and not pretend that any of us are. The humility and the honesty comes in saying, hey, I'm in one of these quadrants. So for example, for me, and Danae Pierre is a Hispanic Latina leader in our city. She leads the Surge Network, which we started, and she's the executive director of it. It's this amazing network. She kind of leads all these pastors and churches in a sense. And she probably comes from the bottom left, like, so partly because of her background, her viewpoint, her church experiences. She's in the bottom left. But here's the thing. I can see her, and what our culture wants to do is drive me to the top right and her to the bottom left and face away from each other and think that each other are evil, wicked people. And use sound bites that she would call me part of the hegemony. She would call me, you don't care about, poor people. You don't care about race. You don't care. Like, you're just using your white privilege, da, 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 da. And I could look at her and say, you're just a part of the secular, humanistic, progressive agenda. You're falling prey to that. So we could do that, which wouldn't be very holy and wouldn't be very unifying and wouldn't be very loving and wouldn't lead us to sit at the table together with Jesus. But what I want to do, and what we've done over the last year, is Danae and I have sat at like literally we sit at tables and share meals together. And we talk, and we talk about these things, and we talk about the kingdom, and we trust each other. And we so I'm sitting at that top right seat. She's sitting at the bottom left seat. And I realize as we're talking, I'm realizing that she sees things about God's kingdom and about the reality that I don't see. And vice versa. She sees that I see things that she can't see because of my viewpoint. And so how do we as the church sit together at this table? This is the table of fellowship. Tim Chester says in his book, A Meal with Jesus, that Jesus basically eats his way through the Gospels. He's going from one meal to another. And so this image of a table at the center that brings these things together, how do we do that? And how do we as individuals, how do we as churches, you guys, y'all are an evangelical church in Florida. I'm assuming there's a lot of people who are going to be more on the top right or even bottom right. Like, you're more on the right than on the left. Maybe I'm wrong in that assumption. But it's like, how do we as a church, and how do you as individuals, how do we sit at tables? How do you in your small groups, whatever it looks like how do you sit at the table and have real conversations about these things. So I'll end there. The one last thing I was going to say is this starts going back to the guy who went from feeling the burn to Trump. If you look at this matrix, it makes sense how you go from that, because you're on the bottom already. And so if the choice is between Trump and Hillary, who would be more up in the top, it's like, well, it's easier for me to go across the bottom a little ways than to go all the way up to the top. And so it starts to make sense of why some people make some different decisions and choices and feel some of the different things that they feel. So I'll leave it at that. I'll stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions, or however you guys want to take it.
Man, that's fantastic, Chris. I appreciate that. And I really love the diagram of the table with the seats. I think I'd missed that in your previous teaching, so I appreciate you sharing that today. That was fresh for me, so that we're seated from our different vantage points, but yet at the table with Jesus, looking at each other instead of looking away from each other. But hey, before Chris hops off here, guys, before you're just left to Cam and I for the latter parts of this discussion, if you have any questions, comments, or anything that you would like to ask for clarification about while we have Chris on here, please, right now in the comments section, now is your opportunity. And Mary Beth or Cam, did y'all notice if we miss anything along the way?
We've had some great comments, not necessarily any specific questions. One question that just popped up was, but everyone has to be willing to listen and open. What would you say to that, Chris? I mean, we would agree. Absolutely, they do.
This is, guys, I'm telling you, this is like my biggest frustration. This is that there's in our culture story, in our culture right now, we are so given to sound bites. So what y'all just did in listening to me talk for probably 20, 30 minutes, that's like that
unheard
of. Stuff doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so when you sit down with someone, and I'm going to stereotype like crazy here, but like when you sit down with someone on the left, what you're getting, what I find, or someone on the right, on the left, what I find, if you start talking about politics, it goes to like tweetable talking points, like quick little talking points that you got. It's like you're regurgitating something you heard last night on MSNBC.
Yeah,
you're regurgitating
right.
something that it's like, I don't know if it was Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity, but I know what you just said was just a soundbite from one of the two of them. And we
memorized them, so we had some daggers to throw in our next debate, you know.
And that's what they're just these like, I have that. It's like, well, this, and it kind of that. Well, I can't like, well, this, well, that, and it doesn't like sit down and engender real conversation. A couple of things I would just say on listening is one. This is so one thing I tried to do is like, we realized when we were planning our church, if you can't write it on the back of a napkin, nobody's ever going to remember it and be able to repeat it and reproduce it. And so that's what we try to do with this matrix. You could write this, like if you sit down, like, hey, can we get coffee or lunch or come over and for dinner and let's just talk politics? Like, can we try this? This is a great way, rather than people are already going in with two preconceived notions about what you want to talk about. One is you just want to convert them to your side. And two, so we'll start with that one. When you do this and you just like, honest, like, where are you? And the goal of this isn't like, I'm not trying to convert Danae to be an establishment Republican. That's not my goal. My goal actually, my life and my understanding of God's kingdom and ability to live fully in God's kingdom would actually be diminished if Danae was over as an establishment Republican and seated in the same seat as me. I'm already hanging out with plenty of top right evangelical white pastors and people who come from that. Like, I already got that. I need other people at that. So the helpful thing in that is like, I'm not trying to convert you to something else. I want to learn from what you're learning in that. So all that to say, one thing that can be helpful is just to to begin the conversation rather than like letting it just get off on like, let's just give our talking points from Twitter, but to like, hey, can I just draw this out? Like, this is a little framework that this random dude on Facebook showed last night, and it was really helpful. Like, here's where I find myself. Is that where you see me? And where do you see yourself? Like, is it similar? Is it different? What do you think you see about God's kingdom that I don't see? So that's one thing that can be can be helpful in getting people to be willing to talk or listen.
When you talked about when you start to drift away from the gospel and drift towards those different quadrants of your ideologies, before you know it, you get into an ism. You get so far out there that you don't just value security or value progress or value equality, but you get to the place where you worship it. I mean, you're getting to a place where like it is central to the vitality of anything that we become or we do. And like once you get to that point, it's interesting. Like when you turn around, if you ever turn back around to look back at the table, you're looking back across the aisle, let's say, then you're seeing Jesus and all the other three quadrants through the lens of your idol, you know, and it's being colored by that now. So, for example, if you're a far right Trumper and you greatly value the security ideology, but you have, like, because of all that's been going on with race and the riots and the pandemic, and like you've drifted so far off into that bottom right hand quadrant, like if you're not careful as a kingdom person, like when you turn back around to look at brothers and sisters of value equality or value progress or whatever, or even the gospel itself, you begin to look at the gospel itself as well as all those other quadrants through the lens of your way removed securityism. And you hear it in sermons, man. You hear it in sermons preached by, particularly in the Bible Belt South. I don't know how often it happens out in Arizona, but I mean, you hear a lot of sermons that are shaped by guys who are looking back through their idol at everything else. You know, I mean, what do you have to say to that?
I think here's one thing this has been super helpful for me of late, is just having this in my mind of just pay attention to what you're so angry about. Like when you get really pissed, really angry about it, it's like, just ask it, like, why am I so angry about this? So let me, and I'm going to take broad, I'm going to say two things that intentionally to kind of inflame, to try to get you angry, right? So I'm
well, don't talk about my double chin, because I'm seeing it based on this camera angle right now.
I'm going to try to get people more on the right angry here, and I could do it on the left, but I only got 8 minutes left or less than that, and so I'm figuring you might have more people on the right than on the left. So I'm just like, let me just make two statements, and watch how frustrated you can get in this. So one, if I were to say I can make a case that at the founding of, like, as America was getting settled and the founding of the United States, less than about 5 to 10% of the people attended church. And the founding fathers, if you read they're using Bible quotes and stuff, but it's more humanistic deism, and it's humanism, and it's, we can do this, and it's you putting the Bible into that, and they're more deistic than they are Christian. And so America was not founded as a Christian nation. Watch your numbers right now. You just had like 30% of your people drop. No.
Nah, they're all going to email Dustin and be like, who is this quack that you brought on here?
This is what listen. Notice, even just as I say that, and I told you this was going to get you angry. Notice how that like does something in you. Now, here's what I'm saying.
Squirming in the seats.
Here's what I'm saying. Does it matter? Is that matter? Is it a good conversation? Should we read some stuff on this? Should we have discussion on it? Yes, absolutely, 100% amen. I'm not saying we shouldn't, and maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. But why does that matter at such a gut level? Like, this is what I get from people. Like, if that's not true, then I don't believe the Bible. I don't know. It's like the United States being a Christian nation or founded on a Christian nation has nothing to do with if Jesus is King and Lord and died and rose again and is coming again or not. Does that make sense? It is not based on that. And the other, I don't want to get into it, but like, you're going to talk about the gospel and race. Like, race is something. We're writing some stuff for our Surge Network for some curriculum we're doing. And I was just on a call earlier on Monday with a few different pastors. We're talking, and like the common consent is like, why among like white evangelicals, just the talk of racism it like raises something. So like, I'm not racist. I'm not, like, it's like
defensive automatically, right?
You go automatically to defensiveness, and it's just saying like you're viewing something through the lens of an idol in that. Like, that's hitting on something deep in that you get so defensive so
It
quickly.
goes back to your question. Like, if you want to start sniffing down the trail of where your idols are, just sniff down the trail of what makes you angry.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a good
That's
point.
Well,
And I know you got to take off, Chris.
I at least need to say this, Chris, because some of these
Yeah.
comments, and then you can leave and let us wrestle with them. One of our commenters said, I thought this was supposed to be a neutral story without a nod to one party, yet here's Chris sharing his political preference. And someone else says, how can I get past the fact that someone who grew up privileged and listening and idolizing Rush Limbaugh can be at the center table? Why not plainly say God's government is the focus? And here's the deal, like, you've identified where you're at on the spectrum. You've turned around. You've recognized the distance between you and the table, and you are attempting to move in that direction by listening to other voices at the table. And so, man, that is an admirable quality that all of us need to do, and that we're trying to get people to think through more and more. Because we live in a fallen world. The politics of the garden have been swallowed up because of sin entering into the story, and all of us are not going to be at the table. If you got to, I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah, let me respond to that. This is so, and this is what's funny with like comments like this, which I don't like. What's hard about it is you can't totally like which side are you coming from? Where are those comments coming from and getting at? But here's just what I find. So if someone's listening to this and you find yourself on the left, this is the danger that I just want to appeal to you is the second I said I grew up this way listening to Rush Limbaugh, like the temptation is to write me off. Listen, the reason I said that is just to let you know, like, I understand where I'm coming from. Now I could tell you a ton other things that would like. I could tell other stories and conversations I've had and votes that I've made that would make you be like, that would make the people on the right be like, this guy's a flaming liberal. So you go both ways. So just be careful if a comment like that's coming from someone on the left, it's like as soon as I say Rush Limbaugh, and it can go the other way. Like as soon as someone on the right, like you just mentioned MSNBC or you read the New York Times, it's like, see, it's given that way. So be careful not to just write people off because they hit like trigger words or stuff like that. The other thing I want to say is, as a pastor, so again, I've made some assumptions about your church, and I may be massively wrong. I'm just going to talk about myself. As a pastor of a church that is mostly white, evangelical, middle to upper middle class people, for me, I'm not worried. So if there's an idolatry of like the kind of the Cal Berkeley secular humanistic going to become communism and all this stuff, if that's a danger in our culture, and it is, listen, that is a legit real thing. And so let's talk about Black Lives Matter as a movement. Can it come from that bottom left corner, and can it go like as an organization? Yes. Yes, that is a real thing. Here's the thing. The people in my congregation, in my missional community, I'm not worried they're going to convert to that religion. Like, they're so far in the other, like, that's not my concern. As a pastor, I'm concerned that they're going to go to the top right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they're going to run too far in their own quadrant.
Yeah. So sitting here, and even so, if some of those comments are coming, like if comments people are like, why am I going to list this guy? Is because I'm pushing on some of the stuff. I'm pushing on some of the stuff on the right. Like that's what I'm intentionally doing because I wanted a pastor and shepherd. Like I'm just making vast assumptions. I'm guessing the majority of your people, like the majority of my people, they're not in danger of becoming deconstructed critical race theory secular humanists. Like that's not the danger. The danger is that you might think Trump's the Messiah. And that's a more of a concern for me with my people. And so I'm going to push more on that. And I'm going to have you read, and I want them having more conversations with people on the left. Now that feels dangerous. Like, well, but it's like, no, I want you because I want you sitting at the table and seeing that a little more. So guys, I really apologize.
Yeah.
I gotta this next thing.
No, we know
really
you got to go. We appreciate your transparency. We appreciate you sharing some time with us tonight.
And we'll clean up your mess. Don't worry, bro.
I was going to say,
yeah, whatever.
the greatest thing
Yeah.
ever. I got to make it back.
We
Hey.
don't expect to dive into the polarizing conversation of politics and it not get messy. So yeah, don't tune in and watch these conversations if you're gonna be too fragile to let us like wrestle through stuff
We
together.
know you gotta go.
We're really
Yeah.
just wanting to point you to Jesus. Like that's the whole point of this, is we want to point you to Jesus and away from the God of politics. So thank you, Chris, for your time, man.
You know, Dustin, I'm looking over some of these comments. There's just some really, really great stuff and some good interaction back and forth.
Yeah. Cool.
Sarah, thank you for the comment you made. And I saw
Oh
this
yeah,
post
I
as
saw
well.
that one. That was
If
fantastic.
you feel yourself politically homeless right now, that's how it should be as a believer. We are ultimately citizens of a heavenly kingdom, and if we were truly at the table, if we were wrapped around Jesus in the middle of the table, like there would be a disorienting sense of the truths that each picture in the quadrant are promoting. And that's kind of why we said this big idea number 2 is that each political ideology, each vision, each platform, every one of those corners in the matrix, they offer us an ideal utopia. If we would just follow that train of thought, if we would follow that policy, if we would follow that belief, if we would follow that candidate, then they would give us a perfect picture of human flourishing. But the reality is they can't, because there's only one picture, there's one piece of the puzzle that they're holding on to. And
which is what we have in so many ways been encouraged and convinced to believe. If we've taken the bait of the social narrative of the culture that we live in, it's like there is a candidate that can really put us in the best situation as a country, and ultimately, like, what was the phrase that we used for the big takeaway? Offer us a what was it, Cam?
A promise of deliverance that ultimately can't deliver.
Yeah, because ultimately, like all of the issues that we vote on and the candidates that we vote for, they're offering you deliverance in different ways. And yes, like you need to be well read, you need to study up, you need to vote, you need to understand the policies, you need to make biblical Christ-centered decisions as you are voting. But like there's nothing wrong with that. But I think going back to what Sarah's saying, not only is nothing wrong with it, it's important. But going back to what Sarah's saying, like there has to be a place in your heart as you are growing and learning to yield all the stuff of life to Jesus. Like you have to eventually arrive at the conclusion that, man, a kingdom citizen doesn't fit comfortably into a bipartisan system. Like there's just not the perfect fit for a kingdom citizen. Yes, like there are like very crucial biblical issues that are on the ballot. I'm not going to argue that. But I'm talking about as a whole, because man, we like cast our lot all the way in. We don't just strike a vote, but we wear the t-shirt, wave the banner, and hate everybody else that isn't wearing the same color that we are. And like there's nothing kingdom about that. Because again, Jesus didn't come to take sides, he came to take over. And so as kingdom citizens, man, we bow to the takeover king, who is ultimately every governing authority in the world has to submit to him. And so we want to submit to him first and foremost above all of this other stuff. And this conversation tonight, if you did get your feelings hurt or if you got offended by something was said, like the whole point of this conversation is to call us as believers out of our worship of politics back to a worship of Jesus, and that we would see the world that we live in through the lens of the gospel instead of seeing the gospel through the lens of the world that we live in.
As well as see that people that may not believe what you believe politically are also image bearers of the one true God.
Amen.
And can I tell you, like, some of the most meaningful conversations I'm having right now are with folks that call GBC home that are probably more on the left than they are on the right, because they are giving me a perspective and a point of view from their experience and from what they have wrestled through in life that has completely helped me to think a little bit more broadly. And I'm grateful for that. Because when I saw for Chris the first time show me that each one of these quadrants had a good creational gift of God at its center that is moving us towards human flourishing, it reminded me that we're not looking at four different religions in these four corners. We're looking at truth that is mixed with a whole bunch of flesh. And how can we begin to move towards the center? And gosh, we want our folks at our church, we want you guys to be at the table with people that don't believe what you believe, and begin to have conversations and ask, hey, why are you where you're at on this part of the spectrum? And again, we can get you this picture if you want to draw it on a napkin. We don't promise to have all of the answers. It's here.
No, you got it. Yeah, it's a little after 9 o'clock, so I know it's time to wrap up. We do appreciate you guys being a part of the conversation. And again, in these coming weeks, we're going to be diving in some more specific areas. This weekend, we'll talk about the gospel in the pandemic. So that means next Wednesday night will also be the gospel in the pandemic in more of a format like this. The weekend after that, 2 weeks from now, we'll do the gospel and race. So we'll do a Sunday morning sermon about that. And then our Wednesday night discussion will be the gospel and race. And again, we'll kind of have an interactive discussion. And then last but not least, we'll wrap up this series called The Gospel in Politics with, on November 1st, we'll hit the gospel and the election, which you'll probably hear some of this stuff we talked about tonight resurface again in that sermon on Sunday, as well as in the discussion on Wednesday night. But
hey, Wednesday night,
join us.
Please be here next Wednesday night. A good close friend of ours, Pastor Steve Pettit's going to be on with us, helping us to think through creating a culture of care and mission in the midst of a pandemic, kind of coming off the heels of this weekend. So when you're listening this Sunday, start writing down some questions and some thoughts that you'd like to bring with you on a Wednesday night. We're trusting the Spirit to help you spit out the bones and keep the meat of this conversation. And that you would see people through the lens of the gospel and see them with the compassion of Jesus. And your pastors see us with the lens of compassion and the eyes of Jesus too. We love you guys. Dustin, pray for us, man, if you would. And pray for Olivia, please. She's at Worley. She's not doing really well right now. Just sick and took a test, and we don't know. And so let's lift her up, man.
Okay. I didn't know that, man.
Yeah. Mama shared that earlier.
Oh, thank you, Miss Melissa, for letting us know. God, we thank you for your love for us. We thank you that you are the reigning King, that we don't have to get lost in which direction our country's politics go, Lord. But we know that eventually you're going to right every wrong. You're going to make every crooked path straight, and you're going to reign supreme once and for all time. Every knee's going to bow, and every tongue's going to confess, and we await that day.
Yeah.
And while we're waiting, God, we wrestle through the tension of trying to struggle with a life that is lived somewhere in those four quadrants. Lord, make your name glorified through this very divisive political season. Make your church shine as a unifying body during a difficult time like this. Maybe we sit down at the table and view one another through the lens of the gospel, educate one another. Understand one another, and ultimately so that the world would see that the kingdom of God and the people of God are so different than this world, that they would long for a greater kingdom and long for a greater people. Lord, we thank you for your love for us. Be with these tonight. Be with Olivia. Lord, I pray that she would feel better quickly.
Yeah.
In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. We love you guys.
See y'all Sunday.
8:30,
10, and 11:30. See you Sunday. 10 o'clock will be live stream on YouTube. I hope that you'll join us as we talk about the gospel and the pandemic.